Here's my Carl Winslow theory.
All right.
Carl started off as a corrections officer in New York, and he
Mhm.
also twilighted as a limo driver
Oh,
in New
that's because
York.
he was in Ghostbusters, right? Okay.
In the early 80s, Carl limo drived in New York, and
Wait,
he was
is
good limo driver.
is that Crocodile Dundee?
Yes,
Okay.
he went by Gus
Okay.
and
Okay.
drove a hilarious Australian man who had a very big knife known as Crocodile Dundee. They remained friends. But he enjoyed his life making, stacking coins. The theme of this is Carl stacking coins. All right.
Got you.
So but he also was a corrections officer. He was making his way in law enforcement. And I think he had a passion for justice and law enforcement. And then, as he was locking some crazy people up, claiming that they were ghosts in New York City, the entire city got flooded with ghosts.
He said,
And
no,
then
no more. Not for old Carl. Not.
the mayor told him to release the crazy people. And then 2 hours later, Times Square is flooded with hot
Go.
marshmallows.
My, and he grabbed Harriet.
And Carl, like any self-respecting
Mm-mm,
black man,
mm-mm.
saw that and was like, "I'm going to move my family all the way to the
Across
other side of the country."
as
Because
far away as we could physically afford, and they landed in LA. I love
why in the world would I stay in New York when there are ghosts? I don't care if this ragtag team got rid of all of them. They exist. I am leaving.
Hey,
So
not only that, Harriet, I heard there's turtles in the sewers. And there's a gang of ninjas going through Brooklyn, robbing everyone. We're out of here.
led by a menace named Hiroku Saki. He is not from here. He is one of the greatest villains of all time,
Pack it
and
up,
that is a
Harriet.
subject for another
Pack
podcast.
it all up. We're out of here.
So Mark, he moves to California, and the reason I say California is because you got to remember Carl stacking paper. All right, so he's doing two jobs at once. In LA, he's working his way up as a cop. And then he also goes to Sacramento every now and then, working his way up to be a cop there too. He eventually, I believe, becomes a detective in Sacramento, helping out a guy named Turner and a dog named Hooch. And the misadventures of this man and his dog made him it made him think about some things. But then when he was back in LA where he really wanted to grow as a cop, well, Mark, Harriet was pregnant with Eddie,
Hmm.
and he dealt during that time with his wife and his newborn child. He dealt with multiple life-threatening events with John McClane. All
Yeah.
right. And he was like, you know what,
No.
John, you've been coming
No.
here every other year and chaos ensues. And now I have three kids.
Yeah.
I think it's time for me to move.
He's Martin in Bad Boy. He's like this.
Yeah.
I can't do this anymore, John. Like you're
So
a crazy person.
So Carl decides to move to Chicago. Carl and Harriet decide to move to Chicago to live closer to family. Harriet gets herself on the feet and eventually becomes an elevator person for some two very interesting folks who actually don't get the credit that they deserve for late 80s, early 90s television, but that's for another day in Perfect Strangers.
Hmm.
And Carl, like, finally looks at all the money he's accumulated for working multiple jobs all these years and is like, you know what, Harriet? We're gonna buy that house. That house that we talked about, that big old house in that nice neighborhood. We're gonna buy that house. And you know what? My mom's gonna move in with us. And your sister and her kid are gonna move in with us. And we are going to live the dream that we wanted. I didn't spend all these years working multiple jobs, putting my life in danger multiple times with crazy white people for us to not live the blue collar life that we deserve. So, Harriet, I'm
Hmm.
gonna buy that house. You quit that elevator job, and we're gonna live the American dream. And then, Mark, this story ends with the day they met Steve Urkel, their next
Steve
door neighbor.
Urkel.
And you know the rest of Carl's
There,
story. But
there
that is
may
my
not be
Carl
ghosts.
Winslow theory.
There may not be ghosts in Chicago, but there's a Steve Urkel. And Carl he's like, maybe
He
we should go
gave
back to
up.
LA.
He gave up. He was
He's
like, you
like,
know
well,
what? Between Ghost
and
and
John.
John McClane, I'll take Steve Urkel.